Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndromes that haunt creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we are so excited to have Vanessa Lillie on the show. She is the author of the USA Today and GMA Buzz Pick best-selling suspense novel Blood Sisters, which comes out in paperback on October 1st, and the best-selling thrillers Little Voices and For the Best. She also co-authored the #1 best-selling ITW award-nominated Young Rich Widows and the sequel Desperate Deadly Widows, which is out in audio now and paperback will release in 2025. Vanessa was a columnist for the Providence Journal and hosts an Instagram live show with crime fiction authors. She's an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, living on Narragansett Island in Rhode Island. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks, guys. Hi.
So great to see you. Thank you for being with us. When we started the podcast, you were one of the first people we thought of, both because we're huge fans of your books, and you also do a tremendous amount for authors' debuts and return authors alike. So there's a lot of facets of you, which we want to get into. Greg,
Thank you, guys.
Well, I was just going to say yes to echo Liz. Thank you for letting us turn the tables on you for this round.
I know I kind of have to not be a control freak. I usually get to ask the questions.
Yeah. This will be a good exercise in letting go.
Yes, that's right.
I hear you. We're all writers. We all have those control things in there.
I mean, we create worlds. That's how much of a control freak we are. We're like, I'm going to just create everything, and everyone says what I want. They do what I want, and I make all the decisions. Yeah, no control issues there.
No, none whatsoever. Well, yeah, so let's jump into some of your myriad work, of which there is much. I would love to start. I think it's a great place to start with the kind of themes of our shows with the imposter aspect. If we jump into your latest book, Blood Sisters, which is phenomenal. For those of our listeners who haven't read it, read it immediately. Sid, your main character, I think is an incredibly compelling character for a number of reasons. And I think one of those reasons, or I should say several of those reasons, is she's an incredibly layered character with a lot of really compelling contradictions in terms of her kind of makeup, right? She's a white passing Cherokee, two-spirit. She works as an archaeologist for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which has her in the position of trying to kind of help people from within a pretty broken system. And so I wondered if you could talk a bit about the kind of the various tensions inherent in writing a character like Sid.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because she has, a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, or at least I was sort of thinking about what does it mean, to be an imposter, as the theme is. And I think part of it is around the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And I think for Sid, the Bureau of Indian Affairs traditionally has had a very adversarial relationship with tribes. I mean, that they were the mechanism to control them, to really steal land, steal resources, even steal money, basically up until fairly recently. So, for her, working within that system, but her aim is to actually help the tribes. She does have to sort of live in two worlds in a lot of ways, which is good for writing a character because that naturally creates conflict. So, and my uncle worked his whole career at BIA. My brother works at BIA. So, it was an area that I'm at least somewhat familiar with. And I know there are a lot of people who do good in it. But I did want to also just reflect the realities of distrust. And when you come into a community, you have a lot to prove if there has been generation after generation of distrust. So as a character, I do think that complexity is interesting. I think the white presenting thing is important for a lot of reasons. One, I'm white presenting, and I wanted to create a character that, I think particularly there aren't that many Indigenous authors published, right? In fact, my friend Danikanava just had the first ever Indigenous written romance published like last
Wow.
week, published by like a traditional publisher.
Yeah.
There's been like white ladies who wrote
Sure.
like, these like very problematic native romances, but in terms of like a just, native characters in love romance, she was the first one. And then like we're in the thriller space, so there are certainly a few thriller authors out there, like David Hesquinobly Whiting comes to mind, who did Winter Counts. You know, but there aren't that many. So I sort of felt like, okay, if I'm gonna, write about my own heritage, I want to make it very personal. And, publishing only has so many seats at the table. And I get asked a lot, like, is it okay if I write a diverse character or whatever? And it's like, sure. But just like know that with limited seating, if you're writing a character that's not actually from your point of view, you're taking a seat at the table, right? And so I just felt like I wasn't even really willing to write outside of my tribe. Like my main character was going to be Cherokee like me, like because I want a Choctaw writer to get that seat, right? I just felt like, and so that's part of why I created Sid really within my lane of experience is because it felt important to take the seat that was like appropriate for me. But I think it also relates to imposter syndrome, which is like it related to me also not feeling completely comfortable going very far outside of my experience because I didn't want people to say, it wasn't authentic, it's not real. And you get that with anything. Like my first two books are primarily set in Rhode Island, and I'm not from here. I lived here about 11 years. But even just writing about a place, you get that concern of like, are people going to read this and be like, oh my God, like you are clearly not from here and you have no business writing about this place, you know? So I fortunately didn't have that experience. I actually was pretty obsessed with Rhode Island, so I think I got a lot of things right. But I also wrote in my debut, my character was like me. She had moved here. So it wasn't like she was a lifelong Rhode Islander. So I think that in a way is kind of a pathway to like authenticity and also just ensuring that the voice is right. And that, like I said, I just, with Sid and this series of books, because I do want her to go into other tribal communities, but the lens will always be a lens that I personally know. And hopefully like the sequel that I'm working on right now to Blood Sisters is set here in Rhode Island, so it's mostly the Narragansett tribe. That's obviously not my tribe, and they have a really different story than the Cherokee story, really different. And so, I'm doing my best to sort of balance um, sharing what I know, not being a part of the tribe, also hopefully giving um, people a little bit of insight so they're interested in it and learn more about it. And I believe like what's happening with their tribe is a reflection of kind of colonialism, and I think there's things that we can take away from it. But again, I have that fear of like of making sure that I'm writing from a true place, that I'm not taking advantage of the culture or appropriating things. So it's kind of a delicate dance. I mean, it's an important one, and it's one like I'm just going to do my best and if I take knocks, I take knocks. But it's hard because as a writer, you do want to write about things you don't know. Like that's part of the process of like research and understanding, and even just putting yourself out there. But I do think we just always have to be really mindful of why we're writing what we're writing and making sure that like that is really the story we need to tell, I guess, for the right reasons.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would imagine with so few seats at the table, if you do decide to take one, you feel that much more scrutinized by everyone else in that group of people who are going to be making sure you get it right, and do you want to talk a little bit about that added pressure?
Yeah, sure. I mean, part of it was I did a fair amount of, I think, educating myself. Like I took some classes from some great teachers and leaders within different tribal communities. And like kind of just listened to how they talked about being in a community. And I also really I tried really hard not to go too far from my experience. Like I didn't grow up on a reservation, for example, so I wasn't going to write about growing up on a res. Like that's not my experience. And I just felt like if I was writing about it, I would just be consuming other people's experiences and like regurgitating them, which isn't very interesting to me anyway. And I kind of think as a reader, you can feel that a little bit. I'm not saying you can't write about going to Paris, right? But if if you've never been there, but I do think if you're talking about like a place and a culture, and that feels different to me, and just like the interactions, and like there's a level of authenticity, particularly around cultures. Like I think of like S.A. Cosby, right? Like there's no way he doesn't live in the Southern Virginia rural community. Like you know what? Like there's just no question, right? He does not live in New York City, right? And I just think as readers, we can often, when you're when culture is a character, which I think oftentimes it can be, you really do have to make sure you're writing from like a really authentic place because I think it just, to me as a reader, you can feel when it's just not quite there. So I really, and I mean, I wrote about where I'm from. I mean, all of that just, and part of it was authenticity, but actually part of it was just like to get an understanding of where I'm from and like to go back as an adult. I mean, there's in Blood Sisters, there's all these threads around environmental injustice, and that's all things I grew up with. I grew up next to what's called the most toxic town in America. It was an EPA, the first Superfund disaster site in the country. Like the creek next to my house would run orange from environmental pollution. Like it's something I just grew up with. And so I kind of wanted to go back as an adult and like look at it again and as a mother now and think about like what it was like for that community. And then there were just kind of other things around, well, like missing and murdered Indigenous women, around like
Mm.
methamphetamine and the way it ravaged Oklahoma and so many other places, and like, the impact it has on families. And so there were just things that just weren't so far removed from my experience that I hadn't really explored before. And I felt after I'd done a little bit of work that I was ready to.
Okay. You seem to my eyes anyway, seem to be using your seat at the table to represent four other Indigenous writers. As you mentioned, there's not a lot that are very well known, or maybe with big five publishers and things like that. So I feel like you're doing a good job of raising awareness and kind of getting that work out on behalf of some other writers, presumably from different tribes. And I'm wondering if making those sort of connections professionally has helped to kind of bridge the experiences between, say, your tribe and the tribe of a different Indigenous writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think so far it's just sort of been really nice. Actually was just DMing with an editor today from like Simon and Schuster because they have an Indigenous author coming out, and I don't know him, but I saw the like every time I read Publishers Marketplace, right? So it's like a listing of all the
Right.
deals, and like anytime there's like an Indigenous writer, I'm like make a note of it so I can go stalk their
Right.
editor and make sure I get an arc so I can like support them. And this is more of a literary fiction novel, but um, I'm whatever, it's great. And I just that I think is really important. And also professionally, what's cool about Blood Sisters is once people have read it, I get asked a lot, what Indigenous author should I read
Okay.
next? I love that question. And in fact, in the paperback, there's a list of them that we put it in the Target, like Target had their own edition, and so that had that list. But now in the paperback, all of them will have it, which is nice. Um, and so like I love sharing. I mean, it's just fun to talk
Yeah.
books, right? But it's really cool to share like Indigenous writers. And like it's, obviously like any group of people, it's like not a monolith at all. I mean, there's just so many different experiences. There's this really cool short story collection called Never Whistle at Night, and it has, I think, almost 30 different short stories by Indigenous writers. And there's just and it's also been on like USA Today and the indie bestseller list for like 40 weeks. I mean, it's bananas. Yeah, it's amazing. Which I think shows the appetite, which is important in publishing to show there's a market. Um, and and so, that's a great way for people to like dip into different writers. And then when you love a short story, as you guys know, then you can like go see what books they've written and like what the collection would be from there. So there's a lot of fun in addition to like thrillers, and now I have another romance to point to. This of my friends just was published, so it's been great. And there's Indigenous owned bookstores too, and sorry, my dog. And the Indigenous owned bookstores also, like, I'm trying hard to support them and do events with them, and it's just we've got a lot of work to do as a community. We've been pretty marginalized and disenfranchised, and we're just now getting seats, and we're just now, getting these opportunities. So we gotta we gotta push.
Right. Right. And not only are you, as a group, getting an opportunity to actually contribute the unique experiences and voices, you're also having to square up against, hundreds of years of representation that is not accurate
Yeah.
or even remotely acceptable. So,
Mm-hmm.
you're having to undo, I think, a lot of stereotypical racist, transgressive interpretations of Indigenous culture. And I'm wondering, because there does seem to be a continuing moment. I know Killers of the Flower Moon came out as a book, years and years ago, and it took forever for that adaptation to come to theaters. But I think with that coming out, I think with the show The Curse, commentated a lot on this topic. Do you feel like people are getting better in this, storytelling, of Indigenous people? I'm also thinking about the Louise Penny adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's getting better. It's really interesting. Lily Gladstone sort of helped people connect, I think, a lot, which is why there's just so much. Books are really important. I think like Tommy Orange did a lot for elevating like Indigenous voices, and she's barking at herself in the mirror. No, thank you. And then but I think having Lily Gladstone out there has been really important. Important in terms of like non-Indigenous people seeing Indigenous people, but then and then also it's important like within for us to just like have people to root for. I mean, to just like look at to see Indigenous designers, to see like Lily on the cover of like magazines, like she was in British Vogue, for example, like on the cover. So it's like that is really important too. So I think it helps, but I mean, it's still just like, I mean, when I was like having meetings, like producer meetings and stuff, whatever, for Blood Sisters, and it's like, so who could be in the cast, and it's just like, it's unfortunately a really short list. And even the questions of like, can there be an Indigenous director? Can there be Indigenous writers? Like, it's a very short list because we're like first generation in a lot of ways of like, of TV writing and like having people to fill those roles. All right, 1 second. Sorry, I get it.
Hearing you kind of talk about this side of the pressure, I'm just thinking from a purely like writing process point of view. How do you kind of tune all of that consideration out just so you can, slip into the writing and the story? Because just having the conversation, and this is just about the Indigenous perspective and your perspective. That's not even getting into the fact that your character's an archaeologist, which is a really complex profession that I'm assuming is not something you do.
No, I'm not sciencey at all.
So how do you sit down with all of these disparate elements and write? Because I would just think analysis paralysis and shut the computer off and lie down.
Yeah. So I'm a natural explainer. So my battle is always to not be preachy, to not be giving too much history, to not be giving too much of my opinion about historical context and how other people should be feeling about colonialism. And that naturally is how I am. And so my struggle is always how to make it interesting and how to take the things that I'm thinking about and care about communicating about, like history, and to put that in a thriller context. So my question is always just, is this boring? Like, how can I make this more exciting? How can I punch this up? How can I create a character that is intriguing, that will pull people along on a journey that I hope lets them have some curiosity about these questions that I think are important within either an Indigenous context or, colonialism. For the second one I'm working on, for Blood Sisters, it was like around environmental justice. It was around missing and murdered Indigenous women. It was around um, the rights of tribes that have been taken away through BIA, and, restoring community, like those kinds of questions. So I usually kind of have because that's why I usually start writing, is because I'm like upset about something, because I want to like understand it and I want to communicate it. Like I want to share it with people, but nobody wants to listen to me rant for 350 pages. Nor do I really want to listen to that. And so it's much more of a challenge to try to create characters and setting and a context for why these things are happening and make it as interesting as possible, and still layer in elements that are true and real, but at the end of the day, it's like it's a page turner and should be kind of fun to read too.
Well, I would say that I think you struck that balance really well. One of the things I was going to bring up is how great your dialogue consistently is in this book, and I think you really get, as a reader, I think you really get a really specific, granular sense of each of these very disparate cast of characters, largely through dialogue. Like the dialogue, it feels really, really lived in, very specific to the not only the situations that the characters are in, their like socioeconomic class, also their personal histories, and a lot of the stuff that they're kind of. There's a lot of kind of traumatic past that, without ruining anything, kind of informs a lot of the story, and even the way that a lot of the characters will refer to these kinds of things really gives you a lot of that. So I was wondering what your kind of tricks are for getting really great dialogue that defines a character.
Thank you. That's really nice. I mean, I overwrite dialogue. Like I just got notes back from my editor, and she's like, "There's a lot of dialogue in this book." I'm like, "There is a lot of dialogue in this book." So I do think I do a lot of character work with
Yeah.
dialogue, and I definitely hear it. And I mean, Blood Sisters is all set where I'm from, and I just where you grew up, it's just in your brain in a way that almost like nothing else is, I would say. And northeastern Oklahoma is a very specific accent, the way you phrase things, the way people are, like it's just, you know, it's something that either it's working or it's not. Like I can just tell from a dialogue perspective. And certain characters were really close to home. Like there's a Raina character who's like a crazy cousin. Like we all have crazy cousins. Like I just know her and I know the kind of girl she is, and I just know she'd be super fun to hang out with, and I know she'd be funny and irreverent, and I know she'd be making really crude jokes. Like there's just certain types, and I don't think they're really stereotypes, but I just think there's just sort of lanes of experience that we fall into, and the people in our lives often are, I can, the parents aren't like my parents, but they're an amalgamation of a lot of different parents. The sort of strong silent father who's trying to be emotional but is, frustrated, the mom who's sort of resentful because the daughter left. Like that's not my parents, but like it's just I know that feeling, and I sort of can just get in a place with them that the language comes through because the character is just visceral. Like it's in my kind of DNA, because I just was around it for 18 years. Um, so that's part of it. And I do think as a writer, I do hear what they're saying a lot. And I just personally love reading dialogue. Um, so I think I just go a little, I'm like cutting a lot of dialogue right now that you actually just doing that upstairs. 'Cause I was like, oh man. And it's like you kind of as a writer too, it's like I was like, I've said this 4 times now. These characters have said the same thing in 4 different ways, 4 different times. So which one's the best?
Right. Yeah. Cut and snip.
From one overwriter to another, my sympathies. Yeah. That's the hardest part of the process for me.
Yeah, I'm in a real tightening up phase. I'm a very I I change my like writing method all the time based on what's going on with the manuscript. So like I might be handwriting, I might be in a Scrivener screenwriting program, I might be in Word, I might be doing note cards, I might print everything out. Anyway, right now I'm in a Microsoft Excel phase where I'm looking at how long each chapter is, and I'm like, girl, you're cutting 500 words. This is not gonna, and I'm just like, I'm very linear right now. It's like, I just have the first 50 pages. Like, I'm like, all the chapters are there. The word count looks good. It's tight. There's like 300 more to go, but I'm like in this like get to it, right? I'm just so sick of my own, bullshit. I'm like, let's just like get this going, right? And so I'm just so linear. Whereas in earlier drafts, I would just be like, I mean, I'm cutting like 4,000 word chapters, which is very long for me, down to like 1,500. And I'm just like, girl, we got to get this going because I want to, you know, I have a draft due in like 3 weeks, so I need to get it going.
I'm curious, just as a quick follow up to that, being as linearly minded as you are, is that kind of a relief when you are able to get to the point where you're able to strip everything down and really kind of like streamline it? Is that a kind of a
This is my favorite draft because like I mean it's really messy, but I kind of have my hands around the story now. Like I still gotta cut some characters. I know it. I actually just cut a character earlier today. But like I know there's like big things have to be moved, but I'm like I can see it. Like I I can focus because like at the end of the day, like you just gotta get to it. Like everybody just wants to get to the end. Like get these characters going, get this plot going, like enough with this, I don't know, build up. So and I do a lot of that as a writer. I'm like feeling like I have to explain everything and like I don't want anyone to be like, what's going on? It's like no, they want the pages to go, they want to get to the end. So I'm getting to the point where I'm sick of all of the old Vanessa drafts, which were way overwritten. And now it's time to really get down to like the story. And hopefully, I can take the best bits of the history or the context or whatever and infuse those in the right way. But I'm really thinking the most about like it's readability, really, I think.
sure.
Well, I'm interested because you're talking about how your writing process has changed. It sounds like from book to book. And
From day to day.
has that kind of flow in different directions continuously? Has that manifested as different levels of imposter syndrome at each book? I mean, have you felt more or less confident in your writing or in a particular book than other times?
Yeah, I keep saying this like to every I've had a few writing events this week and I've been saying this at everyone because I hope that I will remember it, which is about 90% of the time that I'm writing a book, I don't think it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I just keep forgetting that. So that it's like when I'm in it and I'm like, I've been working on it half the time I'm going to be working on it, let's say. I'm like, wow, this is still terrible. My God, it's never going to be good. I'm never going to like it. I'm going to lose my contract. It's all gone. Right. And then but I'm just like, no, Vanessa, you have moments of it being good, and you're like, oh, this is a good chapter, like this is a good twist, but like when you step back and look at it, you're like, oh, this is terrible. So I just have been trying to like stay positive in the sense of like, this is the process. Like you are messy. It takes a long time for everything to really get to a place where it looks even remotely like the nice, shiny published book that you have, right? That's just such a like the steps that go into making that published book, you're so far from that in the drafting phase. I mean, truly. Because I was doing like really big revisions even in like line edits, I feel like. So, there's a lot that's going to come through here. And that final push when you have all that, like they call finishing energy, where you're just like, every plate is spinning and you can just see everything. And that's when like all the sparkle comes at that last like 5% of work. So for me, I try to remember that, it is just, you have to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable and knowing that that is the process. And you have to sort of like trust yourself and not like listen to the imposter syndrome and like actually really know that you do know how to write a book and it will get there. and that it just doesn't feel good most of the time, which is too bad.
And has that been your experience? I mean, has it gotten a little bit easier to kind of remember that each time you go out with a new book, or is it just like starting at zero, you know, every trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think every book is so different. I mean, my debut, I wrote it not knowing if anyone would ever
Yeah.
read it. The follow-up, I wrote it. I mean, sort of your second book is so terrifying because you do know people will read it. And what I sent to my editor was the biggest hot mess you can imagine. And God bless her, she read it and gave me great notes. And I mean completely rewrote that book in 6 weeks. I mean, to the studs. I was writing. I had a laptop in my lap 12 hours a day for 6 weeks, basically. And I was like, I'm never doing that again, hopefully. So like those were very different experiences. And then with Blood Sisters, I was out of contract with my last publisher. So I again sort of wrote it like not knowing if anyone would read it. I mean, I had published 2 books and I felt great about the story and I felt great about what I was writing, but you don't know. The publishing is not you know, a guarantee at an editing phase. So you don't know just because you love it, that doesn't mean anything, honestly. Um, and then with the sequel, I do have an editor this time. And I think, you know, it's maybe been a little less chaotic, but it's still been pretty chaotic. So I think that might just sort of be my
Mhm.
process.
I know you talked about this really candidly, and I so appreciate it on the Struggle Bus series
Oh, I love that
on Liz and
series.
Lisa's podcast. But can you share a little bit about the experience of kind of changing agents, editors, your whole trajectory, and what that did to your, view as a writer?
Yeah, that was a big turning point for me. So by the time my debut, Little Voices, was published, I've been trying to be published for about 13 years. And I have an Instagram live show and I interview authors. I think I've interviewed you guys. I think I've interviewed probably about 150 authors. And I think 10 years is the average I hear the most of how long did it take to publish. And so the point there is for a lot of us, this is a long held and fought for dream. And unfortunately, it is a dream, which a dream and a business is not a great equation, because a business is a business and a dream is a ethereal little butterfly we hold in our
Right.
hands and let it go off into the wheels of the cog or whatever. So I had such a great experience at Thomas and Mercer, my publisher, and they're so great and honestly, did their very best, I feel like, to promote my debut, and it did fine. And then the sequel, or not the sequel, the second book, For the Best, came out, the one I rewrote in like 6 weeks. And it came out during the pandemic, but also I kind of just think my writing style just doesn't super duper vibe with their readers. And that's not a thing, you can know. So like, the sales just weren't enough for them to justify a third book for me. But that was not something I had anticipated because I worked, very hard on all the publicity. I felt like I wanted to be my editor's favorite author. I wanted to I just did so much to be a team player, like all the things you should do, but not with the expectation that that's going to make the business bend to you, right? It's just you being a good person in a business versus like, oh, they would never drop me because I do all the things and they love me. Like that's not how this works. But I really didn't know that. And for whatever reason in my head at the time, I really thought that success looked like a book a year thriller author. Like, and I don't know where exactly that came from. Like I've been going to Thriller Fest since like 2018, and I know I really admired a lot of authors there maybe who had that book a year situation. But point being, when my publisher said no more books, and then a little ways down the road, I left my agent. I was sort of like back at square one after sort of fighting for a dream for like 13 years. And I thank God was like, all right, like what? Like a post-mortem sort, like what happened here? Like why are we here? And what I figured out um is that I really had the wrong mindset. Like it was part of this like lack mentality. Please, please, please love me. Please, please, please say this book is great. You know, this like pick me, love me, like this external validation. And like that energy is just not right for this business. It's not. And I think when you find an agent, I think when you find a publisher, I think when you're selling books, your energy needs to be, this is the thing I've produced. I am proud of it. It's the best I can do. Take it or leave it. Like that's it. Like thank you so much, you're grateful, you're appreciative, but like at the end of the day, it is not a form of validation. It is not you healing wounds. It's you creating something that you love and believe in and giving it to people to have their own experiences with it that really aren't really your business, how their experiences with your work. And it just took me a little bit to get that. So when I went back out to find a new agent and eventually a new publisher, I was like a completely different person professionally. Like I just had a totally different attitude. You know, I wanted to be who I was. I was certain in what I was writing. I knew that this was the book I was supposed to be writing. And my hope was that it would all align and an agent would agree and a publisher would agree and there would be readers there. But I don't control that. And so I can only do that part, write my part. And I have my little mantras and I had like lots of positivity and I got really into tarot and astrology and there's like all other things that happen to help me kind of be more zen about things. But the main sort of mantra that I stick to is just what is meant for me will never pass me by. And I just believe that things will line up when they're meant to line up. And I just have to keep working hard and putting myself out there and being willing to get kicked around, be willing to fail, be willing, you know, but just stay in the mix and try to be as courageous as I can be. And the things that happen are sort of meant to happen to me. And that's all I can do. It's not really more than that. It's not magic. It's not a sudden healing of my insecurities. It's not suddenly I am a good writer because people have chosen me or because I've hit a list or whatever. Like it's actually all of that is outside of me and I can only like concentrate on what's within me. Um, Not that I'm like that all the time. I like worry and obsess and all of those things, but that is more who I am versus how I used to
Yeah.
be.
No, I mean, it seems like just over the course of this conversation so far, we've progressed from all three of us half joking about being control freaks at the top of it to you sounding like you're really ceding a lot of control, giving over to the universe, really kind of going with the flow in a lot of ways and adapting as you go between different publishers, different agents, different publishing experiences, and all of that. Um, which leads beautifully into one of the other projects that you have been working on now for a couple of projects, which is the Widow series. You have three wonderful co-authors, and that, you know, as Liz and I are always curious about with other authors who co-author things, it almost sounds like you were setting yourself up beautifully to then go into a kind of a co-writing situation with this wonderful group.
Yeah, that the success of that series taught me like the importance of intention because the intention of that series was to have fun and to remember why I love to write. And so I had that intention. I brought together people who I thought would be great to work with. We wrote a story that was like 80s campy and fun to write. And it's like, we're going to have the most fun ever. And I think that intention and that feeling came out on the page, which is why it was successful. Versus if I had gone into it like, oh my God, I need a job. Like, I'll do anything, you know, I'll write anything, I'll be anything. Like, just, you know, give me a publishing contract. That's such a different energy. And so for us, we were able to, I think part of the reason why it was successful is because I think people could feel that in the writing, that we really were just enjoying ourselves and having fun. And that came in, but that came before Blood Sisters, thank God, too. I had like something to do while I was figuring out my career in life. And I just kept being like, this is so fun. Like I like who I am in this project. I like working with other people. Like this is how I want to feel. So that feeling is important, and finding projects that make me feel that way and get me excited and enthusiastic versus like, oh my God, I just need another contract. I have a lot of friends who you feel that from them. It's like contract to contract to contract. And I get money and I get bills, but there's something else there energetically, I think, that you have to kind of rise above that a little bit to be about the work, to be about your vision, to be about why you're plopped on the earth, not to get too about it, but like, you know, we're here for some reason. We're in a little meat suit. So probably you're here for a reason. And if you're a storyteller, then you need to be telling stories that you care about. And you're going to spend like a freaking year on it and plus, and have to talk about it all the time. And, it'll live longer than you. So, um, care about it if you can and get out of the like that lack fear thing as much as possible. Because I mean, we all worry about money and bills and contracts, of course, but I think that the business can just crush us down so much that that is actually our first thought versus what do I actually want to like, where's the joy? Like, where is that coming from? And when you write from that place, I think you actually will have more success versus the clinging to and worrying and trying to control it all.
Mm. It's so wise, and it makes me think about all of the debuts that have, broken out versus sophomore books where people have had multi-book deals or advances. It changes the mindset, and I think the process, the craft, that gets, lost in the sauce when you have to start thinking about yourself as a brand. And what's so impressive about having you specifically talk about this is I know you have a deep understanding and speak often about kind of the business side of things, specifically marketing, and how authors can, be their brand in addition to being craftsmen. So, having had some experience on the business side myself and working in publicity and marketing and knowing how exhausting that can be and rejection filled. What are some of the things that keep you positive and kind of forging ahead with what you know? And what are some of the things that you tell new and old authors about how to approach that kind of side of being an author?
Yeah, I think it actually goes back to that joy thing. And I really, number one, you just have to have a way for readers to connect with you. So I never tell people like, oh, you have to, get on Instagram or anything at all. Actually, I think that's bad because social media, I mean, if you're not being authentic, people know it in a second and like a millisecond. Like if you're forcing yourself to post things, if you're not enjoying it, it just people can feel it. And every day we're trained more and more on that because we look at our phones for 9 hours a day now. So like the level of which we can feel through people and their faces and what they're posting and their phrasing and just all of it means that we need to find the things that we enjoy. Because in theory, if you're a storyteller, you like telling stories to people and you want them to have a connection to you. And so I think people need to sort of think about how do I want to connect with people? Is it a Substack? Is it a newsletter? Is it talks at the library? Is it Instagram threads? I don't know. And like, play around with things, like give it 6 months, but like try it out for a little while. It takes like I've been off and on Twitter for like 2 or 3 years, or not Twitter, sorry, TikTok. Like I don't post very much. I feel like I still don't get it. I think it really does take a while to understand it's a culture. And, being an elder millennial, it's not my culture. And so, and I still don't even know if I have a marketing place on it. It might just be something I consume and enjoy. Um, and so and so I don't feel bad that I'm not on TikTok. I don't feel bad that I was always terrible at Twitter. I was never good at Twitter. And like what I like and what I genuinely enjoy is Instagram. And that's almost 90% of the marketing that I do. And, I have the followers that I have. It's not huge, but like it's fine because it's like the people who want to see me and are interested in me can find me and I can connect with them in that way. And the thing I love is like shouting out authors and like being excited for other people because it's a really hard business and like I get so much joy celebrating other people. That's fun and you can feel good daily about this business because you're excited for other people. And so Instagram lets me do that easily and quickly and it helps people. So like that feels good. So I think for people who are just sort of like, oh, I hate marketing, it's like, well, I think you can find something that you do like, though. I think you have to push yourself, and you might not like it a lot at the beginning, but I think as a storyteller, we do have some obligation to find a way for people to connect with us who like us and who like our work. And I think that there are enough ways to do that now that people need to kind of like suck it up a little bit and find the one way that they don't mind. And like I said, it could be, a newsletter. And if you, I mean, you're a writer, maybe you love doing that. It could be photography. I mean, it could be posting recipes. I don't know. It doesn't have to be book news. In fact, I actually don't think that's that effective. I think, the people who I know who are like next level at this, like Geneva Rose, for example, she posts book stuff, but it's personality driven, right? It's not like buy my book all the time. It is some of that, but what people love is like knowing about her dog and her husband Drew and stuff. And I think none of us are Geneva Rose, but I think the point is, to not put like a parameter, like, oh, I have to go on Instagram and I have to post about my book. It's like, don't do that. That's not going to work. Instead, think about your readers and like what they might be interested in or what books, like you're a reader, talk about books you're reading. So I just, I know people hate social media and I know authors complain about it a lot, but I actually think it's just because they feel overwhelmed by it. And also, I think publishers sometimes, I haven't had this experience though. My publisher's been really kind about it. I think sometimes people get the feeling like publishers want them to go viral and sell 1 million books, which of course, but I think most publishers know now that that's not realistic. Even on like book talk and selling books through book talk has nothing to do with the authors themselves. That is so organic. I mean, obviously, because publishers are constantly sending out arcs and stuff to these TikTokers and they have no control over success, right? So if there was a way to do it, they would have done it already. And so that means like take the pressure off yourself and just find find the one way that you enjoy a podcast. Like find a way that you naturally like interacting with people and that you can do on a somewhat consistent basis that people can feel connected to you. And then I think that is the marketing that I think authors can tackle. And I think anybody can do that.
So it sounds as if you're saying almost like, try and find the joy in the marketing as you do in the writing in a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think we have a little bit of an obligation these days to do that for readers. I really do. I think I do love the business side, so I'm not going to go super into this, but like I think that like a brand loyalty, what that really means is, it's your name on the book, but it's also them excited about who you are and curious about you as a person and like what you're working on. And like maybe they've seen a little bit of it and maybe you've been talking about it. And like I think that is something that we can contribute to. And it gets people excited and adds like a layer of experience to reading a book. And that I think is important. And with social media and things, that is sort of how we consume things. We very rarely go to a movie where we don't kind of know who's in it, or even, you know, that's sort of part of the deal is persona. And not that you have to tell everything or whatever, but I do think now more than ever, people are interested in a little bit more about the people who are creating their content and want to feel connected in that way.
Yeah.
I would love to, now that we're kind of coming down the stretch with the conversation here, I would love to bounce back over to your creative work in terms of the book stuff. One of the things that kind of stuck out earlier in the conversation is you mentioned colonialism and how the theme of colonialism is sort of central to book two, right? To the sequel to Blood Sisters. Um, there was this incredible, you have so many wonderful passages in Blood Sisters that are so poignant and I think so spot on and really, I don't know, encapsulate an experience. I'd love to read one now because I think it speaks to that. So, for our listeners, this is a scene, it's sort of a confrontational scene between an Indigenous character and a poor white character. And it's from the Indigenous point of view. And the description goes thusly: the burning gaze hungry for a place to send decades of wrongs, resentments, and likely true injustices. Maybe that's the saddest part. If he wasn't so ignorant, he'd see that the people he hates and villainizes have more in common with him than the better off white people where he thinks he belongs. It made me think of that when you were talking about colonialism earlier. And while its land theft is the kind of the primary theme of the first book, you're certainly dealing with a lot of, I think, what has been the kind of power framework and structure of colonialism for eons. And I think it's the same playbook that gets played off, in whatever situation with whatever marginalized people. So it sounds like that's sort of a theme that is running through this series. And I just wonder kind of if there's, I don't know where you are in the process in terms of being able to talk about the new book, but maybe talking about just some of the themes or the through lines as well.
Yeah. Maybe this will help me revise it too. So colonialism is a really big part of this book right now. Maybe even, I mean, it's going to always be a big part of the book, these books, because it's dealing with the history of America and
Right.
pre-America. But I'm coming from Oklahoma, and now I live in New England. And this is the heart of colonialism. This is where the ships rolled in from England, right? And this is where our country first started figuring out how to kill and destroy a culture, to isolate, to make promises that they would go back on. And the things that it was, the things that were done here in those New England days were replicated all over the country for hundreds of years, right? Like there's sort of and it wasn't a new playbook. Colonialism was not created in America, that's for sure. It's something that's been done in England, all over the world, and all those things. But for here, I'm so interested in what does it mean in living a modern life to have been built on a colonial system? Like just like I think, at least for me as a white presenting Cherokee woman, like a white woman, like I have white privilege. That like when Trump was elected and we had all the pink, hats and we were like women's marching, and then you see the statistic that like 60% of white women voted for Trump, for example. Like I had a lot of like white feminist blinders, really stripped from me through those years. And I think there are also blinders on us around how colonialism and the ways in which we stripped away the original people who were here and like their relationship to the land and their approach. And like, tribes weren't allowed to practice their religious beliefs until like the 70s again. Like the ways in which we truly just brought in a system that was really rigged, and how that affects us today and how we don't see it, myself included. And so this book, has some remains tied back to what was the bloodiest battle in the history of the state, like in the 1600s, like kind of one of the early kind of a massacre of women and children that sort of marked a turning point for when the colonists were able to really seize the land and seize control. And so there's some remains tied back to that time found. And then Sid Walker, my main character, is then introduced to a group called the Founder Society, and they are descendants from the founders of the country. It's sort of like a secret society, but it's like an opportunity for me to think about what modern colonialism is. And it sort of is a country
Yeah.
club, but it is more than a country club. And it's country clubs were founded out in New England too. Like the first country clubs are from Boston, right? And so like that's really interesting to me too, of just this idea, because it's colonialism, but it's also capitalism, which is all about protecting wealth and restricting opportunity, so that you're able to keep all the things that you want and acquire more things and make sure your lineage has those things for generations to come. And in order to do that, you have to really disenfranchise a lot of people. So I'm trying to explore that in an interesting way and do it within like the history of this land and like I've written a few scenes that the it's called the summer meeting, which is the powwow of the Narragansett tribe, which is the oldest recorded powwow in the country. Actually, the word powwow is a Narragansett word, and they've had recorded powwows for 350 years, which is really incredible. But they've had it for thousands of years, but recorded. But as a tribe, they weren't recognized by the federal government until the 80s, like 1980s.
Okay.
So it's just fascinating to me. Um, and the thesis of like all of my work and what I truly believe in my core is that many of the problems of this country, like the anger and the hatred, and all comes down to disconnection. And I believe disconnection is key in colonialism. I think that is, you have to be disconnected from your neighbors and other them. You have to have the same friends and you have to go to the same churches and you have to like go from your car to the store, back to the car. Like I think that isolation is key. And I think that the healing is going to come in a return to those original beliefs and an indigenous approach. And that's not a new idea. There are many, many smart indigenous writers who are writing about that. Like Braiding Sweetgrass is an incredible book by Robin Hall Kimmer about our relationship with the earth and the land. And I think that is where healing comes in. But I think that kind of a relationship is in direct conflict with colonialism.
Also,
so that's but in a thriller.
Yeah.
But make it a thriller.
Well, and with everything you just said, it was, striking this chord in me that, the New York Times published this book of like the 100 greatest novels ever, and there was virtually no thrillers on them. And the kind of conventional wisdom and attitude towards this genre is that there aren't really heavy hitting, subjects being addressed. And, you are proving that so wrong. And I just am so appreciative of your books and all of the other authors we've talked to this season who are including really concise and astute commentary on the world around them and putting it in the context of readable thrillers, because what you're doing is undoing a lot of, shitty history lessons from public school that anything I learned from was wrong. And to be able to educate myself while reading a book that moves the pages and makes me feel something, I mean, that is a hat trick if I've ever heard one. So I have goosebumps about this next book of yours. You have to come on when you finish it. Do you have a timeline, Vanessa? Do you know when it's going to be done?
So I think it's supposed to come out next September is the tentative. So next early fall, hopefully. And it doesn't have a title. In fact, I was just emailing title ideas to my editor today, which is driving me crazy. Yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about titles, but not having a title drives me crazy.
Same.
It's like my North Star. And so I always have working titles, but deep down I know they're not going to stay. So I can't get too attached.
Yeah, I don't think we've only had one title in 4 books that was the
Yeah.
original title. Is
Yes,
that right,
and it
Greg?
was partly everyone involved, including our whole editorial team and our whole crew at Dutton, was amazed that it hadn't already been used, so we just jumped right on it. I think that was half the reason. We're like, no one's used this yet, and so we jumped on, and that was unanimous. But I mean, I think our first book we changed the title a dozen times. Yeah. So
yeah,
There's titles are really hard. It's artsy marketing, and it actually needs to probably reflect the book.
right. Yeah, it's got something to do with the actual plot. Yeah, it is. It's threading.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, Vanessa, thank you for being on.
Vanessa, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to ask, where can people find you?
Well, I'm always on Instagram. If you see me on there, tell me to get off and go edit.
Will do.
But yeah, and I have a newsletter that I put out every so often, not regularly. It doesn't always bring me joy, so I don't always do that. But I do like Facebook and Instagram is kind of the best ways to
Very
connect.
good. Okay. Well, we will stay in touch. Our listeners, please check out Vanessa's work, all the wonderful work that she's doing, both her own stuff and for other authors and aspiring authors and her community. And you are truly really generous and like your outreach is inspiring. So thank you, and thank you for lending us some time tonight.
Thank you guys. You right back at you. This is so cool that you're doing this podcast, and you guys are big supporters of authors too. I mean, everybody should be following on Instagram. I love all your book posts and everything.
Well, we learned it from watching you.
Only 80s kids will get that commercial.
Exactly right.
Elder millennials.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Vanessa. We really appreciate it. All right. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
You can find us on Instagram at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com. Thanks so much, and until next time.